The golden facade Julian Pierce adjusted his custom-tailored Armani suit as he examined his reflection in the mirror. At 34, he had mastered the art of projecting success, his dark hair perfectly styled, his jawline accentuated by just the right amount of stubble, his posture emanating confidence that bordered on arrogance. "Julian, darling, are we fashionably late enough yet?" Vanessa Montgomery sauntered into the bedroom, her silk dress shimmering under the chandelier light. She was everything he had. Convinced himself he needed, sophisticated, well-connected, and undeniably beautiful in a way that turned heads at every function. "Almost," Julian replied, slipping his Rolex over his wrist. "Harrison's charity gala deserves our grand entrance." What Julian would never admit aloud was how calculated this relationship had been. 8 months ago, when his tech startup began gaining serious traction with investors, he'd made what he called a strategic personal upgrade. Olivia Winters, his partner of 3 years who had supported him through the lean times, suddenly became inadequate for the life he envisioned. "She's too ordinary," he had told his business partner Marcus, over drinks after ending things with Olivia. "Sweet girl, but she doesn't understand the world we're entering. I need someone who enhances my image, not someone who still gets excited about discount movie tickets." Marcus had frowned but said nothing. 2 weeks later, Julian met Vanessa at a networking event, and his upgrade was complete. "The Freeman Foundation is expecting our donation tonight," Vanessa reminded him, applying another layer of lipstick. "Daddy says Harrison's connections could be valuable for your next funding round." Julian nodded, mentally calculating the return on investment for tonight's charitable giving. Everything was a transaction now. Even generosity had its price tag and expected returns. As they descended in the private elevator of Julian's downtown penthouse, he scrolled through his phone, pausing at a notification from a mutual friend's social media post. For a moment, he glimpsed Olivia in the background of a photo, looking different somehow. He quickly scrolled past. "Did you see who's on the guest list tonight?" Vanessa asked, not looking up from her own phone. "Dominic Thorne might actually make an appearance. He never comes to these things." Julian's fingers tightened around his phone. Dominic Thorne, the reclusive founder of Thorne Innovations and the man whose success Julian had been desperately trying to replicate. Worth billions, Thorne was known for his brilliance and for avoiding the social circuit that Julian so carefully navigated. Probably another rumor, Julian dismissed, though his pulse quickened at the possibility of finally meeting his idol. "His assistant probably just sends donations to keep the invitations coming." The chauffeur opened their car door, and Julian emerged, offering his hand to Vanessa with practiced grace. Camera flashes greeted them, exactly as he had planned. Tonight was another opportunity to cement his place among the elite, another chance to prove he had made all the right choices. As they walked the red carpet toward the venue's entrance, Julian couldn't shake a strange feeling of unease. He pulled Vanessa closer, displaying her like the ultimate accessory. "Smile, darling," he whispered. "Everyone is watching." And they were, though not for the reasons Julian hoped. Behind the envious glances he so craved lurked whispers he couldn't hear, about the hollow man who traded substance for shine and the storm that was coming his way. Remnants of the past Olivia Winters stared at the invitation on her kitchen counter, the embossed lettering of the Freeman Foundation Annual Gala catching the morning light. 6 months ago, she would have immediately discarded anything that might put her in Julian's orbit. Now she simply felt a distant curiosity. "Are you actually considering going?" asked her roommate Tessa, sliding a mug of coffee across their small but sunlit apartment kitchen. Olivia tucked a strand of chestnut hair behind her ear. "I've been working with the Freeman Foundation's literacy program for 3 months now. Eleanor Freeman personally asked me to attend." What Olivia didn't mention was how she'd rebuilt herself after Julian had dismantled her world with clinical precision. The day he'd ended things, "We've outgrown each other," he'd said, as if they were clothes rather than people. She'd spent hours crying on Tessa's shoulder. Then she'd applied for a teaching position that required her literature degree, volunteered at the foundation, and slowly rediscovered parts of herself that had withered in Julian's shadow. Besides, Olivia added, I'm not the same person he left behind. This wasn't bravado. The woman who had desperately tried to fit Julian's escalating expectations, straightening her naturally wavy hair, laughing at insider jokes she didn't understand, pretending to enjoy networking events, had gradually faded away. In her place stood someone who had remembered how to value her own quiet strength. Later that afternoon, Olivia sat in the modest office of the foundation, sorting through children's books for their upcoming literacy drive. Olivia, there you are. Eleanor Freeman, the 68-year-old matriarch of the foundation, appeared in the doorway. I wanted to introduce you to someone who's taken an interest in our work. Standing beside Eleanor was a tall man with observant eyes and an understated presence that somehow filled the room. Olivia recognized him instantly from news articles. Dominic Thorne, the tech visionary whose innovations in sustainable energy had made him both wealthy and respected. Mr. Thorne has just made a substantial donation to expand our literacy program, Eleanor explained, beaming. Dominic stepped forward, his handshake firm but not dominating. Eleanor tells me you're the heart behind the curriculum design, he said, his voice carrying a quiet depth. I'd love to hear more about your approach to engaging reluctant readers. What began as a 15-minute conversation stretched into 2 hours. Olivia found herself passionately explaining her teaching philosophy while Dominic asked insightful questions that revealed his own love of literature, something rarely mentioned in profiles about him. You know, Dominic said as their impromptu meeting concluded, I've been looking for someone to help develop educational applications for underserved communities. Your perspective would be invaluable. 2 weeks and several meetings later, Olivia found herself working as a consultant for Thorne Innovations' education division. Their professional relationship evolved into friendship, built on shared values and genuine respect. Dominic valued her insights in ways Julian never had, and somewhere along the way, something deeper began to grow between them. The night before the gala, as Olivia considered whether to attend, her phone buzzed with a message from Dominic. Eleanor mentioned you might be at tomorrow's event. I typically avoid these functions, but I'd be honored to accompany you if you'd like support. Tessa found Olivia smiling at her phone. Well, are you going? Yes, Olivia replied, finally making her decision. And I'm not going to hide or shrink myself for anyone. What neither woman voiced was the unspoken truth. This wasn't about Julian anymore. It wasn't about proving anything or seeking revenge. Olivia was simply living her life authentically, pursuing work that mattered with people who valued her. And if Julian happened to witness this transformation, that was merely an incidental footnote to her story, not its purpose. As she prepared for bed, Olivia realized she felt something unexpected. Gratitude. Julian's rejection, painful as it had been, had ultimately freed her from a life that was never truly hers. Tomorrow would come with its own challenges, but for the first time, in a long while, Olivia was genuinely looking forward to attending a gala, not as someone's accessory, but as herself. The gala collision crystal chandeliers cast a golden glow over the Freeman Foundation Gala as society's elite mingled in their finest attire. Julian Pierce worked the room with practiced charm, one arm perpetually wrapped around Vanessa's waist, his other hand gesturing animatedly as he regaled a circle of investors with tales of his company's projected growth. We're expecting to double our valuation by Q3, Julian boasted, noticing with satisfaction how Harrison Freeman, the foundation's current director and son of Eleanor, nodded approvingly. Vanessa has been instrumental in our branding strategy. Vanessa preened at the mention, though her eyes continuously scanned the room for more influential connections. Their relationship functioned like a well-oiled business partnership, each enhancing the other's social capital, neither particularly concerned with deeper connection. "Julian, I need to speak with the Richardsons," Vanessa whispered. "Their daughter just launched that fashion line." As she slipped away, Julian reached for another champagne flute from a passing server. 6 months of these events had taught him the perfect level of intoxication, enough to appear relaxed, but never enough to loosen his carefully maintained control. "Pierce, didn't expect to see you here," called Marcus, Julian's business partner, approaching with his wife. "Thought you'd be preparing for the board presentation on Monday?" Julian waved dismissively. "All under control. Tonight's about making impressions. Did you hear Dominic Thorne might actually show? The man's a phantom, hasn't attended a social function in years." "Thorne?" Marcus raised an eyebrow. "That would be surprising. Not exactly known for—" The subtle shift in the room's energy came first. A ripple of whispers, a redirection of gazes toward the grand entrance. Julian followed the collective attention, his practiced smile freezing on his face. Dominic Thorne had indeed arrived, his commanding presence accentuated not by flash but by quiet confidence. His tailored suit spoke of wealth that didn't need announcement, and his normally serious expression was softened by something Julian couldn't immediately identify. Then he saw her. Olivia stood beside Dominic, transformed yet unmistakable. Her wavy hair fell naturally around her shoulders, and she wore a deep blue gown that was elegant without being ostentatious. But the most striking change was in how she carried herself, with a self-possession Julian had never seen during their years together. "Is that—" Marcus began, then fell silent at Julian's stricken expression. Julian's champagne glass nearly slipped from his fingers. "Excuse me," he muttered, retreating to the bar where he ordered something stronger than champagne. From this vantage point, he watched as Dominic and Olivia were warmly greeted by Eleanor Freeman. "Julian, there you are." Vanessa reappeared, irritation evident in her tone. "Why are you hiding by the bar? Harrison was asking about you and—" She followed his gaze. "Who's that with Dominic Thorne? They seem rather close." "No one," Julian replied too quickly. "Just some teacher who works with the foundation." But Vanessa's social radar was too finely tuned. "Wait, isn't that your ex? The boring one you were with before we met?" Her lips curved into a smirk. Well, she certainly found herself an upgrade. The comment stung with its unintended accuracy. Julian watched as Dominic placed a protective hand on the small of Olivia's back, while she spoke animatedly with Eleanor about something that made both women laugh. The genuine warmth between them was palpable, even from across the room. Throughout the evening, Julian found his attention repeatedly drawn to the couple. When Dominic introduced Olivia to tech industry leaders as the brilliant mind behind our new educational initiative, her face lit up, not with the self-conscious smile Julian remembered, but with passionate conviction as she outlined their project. "Julian, are you even listening?" Vanessa hissed, pinching his arm discreetly. "The Andersons just invited us to their yacht next weekend. I said we'd love to come." "Of course," he replied automatically, his eyes still tracking Olivia and Dominic. As they moved through the crowd, a respected center of gravity rather than social climbers seeking validation, the room suddenly felt too warm, too crowded. Julian loosened his tie, wondering when exactly he had become the one desperately seeking approval, while Olivia, quiet, unassuming Olivia, had somehow found authentic belonging in the very world. He had convinced himself she couldn't navigate. As the evening progressed, one truth became increasingly clear. Julian had built his rise on the illusion of value, while Olivia had built hers on value itself. And watching her now, respected, admired, genuinely happy, Julian began to question which of them had truly been too ordinary for greatness. Mirrors of truth. The string quartet began a waltz, and couples drifted toward the dance floor. Julian stood alone at the periphery, Vanessa having disappeared to network with a fashion editor. His fourth whiskey sat half empty in his hand, a poor shield against the uncomfortable revelations of the evening. Across the room, Dominic guided Olivia onto the dance floor with a gentleness that spoke volumes. Julian couldn't tear his eyes away from their effortless movement, the genuine smiles they exchanged, the way Dominic leaned down slightly to catch her words. They make quite the pair, don't they? Julian turned to find Eleanor Freeman beside him, her eyes twinkling with the wisdom of her 70 years. I suppose, he replied non-committally, straightening his posture. Dominic Thorne is an impressive man. Eleanor's gaze remained on the dancing couple. Yes, but that's not what I meant. It's rare to see two people so genuinely aligned in values, in vision. She turned her knowing eyes to Julian. Olivia has been a blessing to our foundation. When Dominic started funding our literacy program, I had no idea they would connect so profoundly. Julian swallowed hard. How did they meet? Here at the foundation. Dominic came to discuss his educational initiatives and found Olivia surrounded by children's books, designing curriculum. He said later it was like finding someone speaking his language when he'd been surrounded by translators his whole life. Eleanor smiled. Some connections aren't about strategy, Mr. Pierce. They're about recognition. The older woman's words cut through Julian's defenses with surgical precision. He muttered an excuse and retreated to the terrace, needing air that wasn't perfumed with expensive cologne and unspoken judgments. Outside, the night sky stretched above the city lights. Julian loosened his tie completely, confronting truths he'd been avoiding. His relationship with Vanessa was a transaction, not a partnership. His social climbing had earned him invitations, but not respect, and somewhere along the way, he'd confused the appearance of success with its substance. Julian? He turned to find Olivia standing in the terrace doorway, the soft lighting behind her creating an almost ethereal effect. Up close, the changes in her were even more pronounced, a quiet confidence, a certainty of self he'd never witnessed during their time together. Olivia, he managed, his usual smoothness deserting him. You look different. A small smile touched her lips. I am different. Or perhaps just more myself. An awkward silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken histories. Dominic Thorne, Julian finally said, unable to keep the edge from his voice. That was quick work. Olivia's expression didn't harden with anger as he expected. Instead, she regarded him with something closer to compassion. It wasn't work at all, Julian. That's what you never understood. Not everything is a strategic move towards some projected outcome. The truth of her words resonated uncomfortably. Does he know I'm your ex? Yes, she said simply. It's not a secret or a strategy, just part of my past. Before Julian could respond, Vanessa's voice cut through the moment. There you are. I've been looking everywhere. She appeared at the terrace door, her smile faltering slightly at the sight of Olivia. Oh, hello. Vanessa, this is Olivia, Julian said mechanically. Olivia? Vanessa? Olivia extended her hand with genuine politeness. Lovely to meet you. The Foundation appreciates your support tonight. Vanessa's handshake was brief, her assessment swift. Your dress is interesting. Vintage? New, actually, Olivia replied without defensiveness. A friend designed it. Well, Julian and I should return to our guests, Vanessa said, placing a possessive hand on his arm. The Westbrooks were asking about our upcoming trip to Bali. Julian caught the flicker of recognition in Olivia's eyes. Bali had been their dream destination, a trip they'd planned for years but never taken because he'd always been too busy. Now it was just another status marker to drop in conversation. Of course, Olivia said warmly. I should find Dominic as well. We're announcing the expansion of our literacy program tonight. She turned to leave, then paused. It was good to see you, Julian. I hope you find what you're looking for." As she walked away, Julian realized she hadn't meant it as a barb or challenge. It was a genuine wish from someone who had already found what mattered. Returning to the ballroom, Julian watched as Dominic proudly introduced Olivia to the gathered crowd. Her passionate speech about educational access drew enthusiastic applause, while Dominic gazed at her with undisguised admiration. In that moment, Julian confronted the most difficult truth of all. He had never truly seen Olivia, not her potential, not her strength, not her heart. And in failing to see her, he had ultimately failed to see himself. Beyond revenge, the weeks following the Freeman Foundation Gala unfolded in ways Julian Pierce hadn't anticipated. The Monday board meeting he'd been so confident about turned disastrous when investors questioned his company's direction and substance. His carefully constructed responses, once so effective, suddenly sounded hollow even to his own ears. "They want more than projections," Marcus told him afterward in the empty conference room. "They want innovation that matters. Purpose beyond profit. Purpose." The word haunted Julian as he sat alone in his penthouse office, the city lights twinkling below like distant stars. Vanessa had ended things 3 days after the gala, a mutual decision she'd called it in the press, though in private she'd been brutally honest. "We're not trending upward anymore, Julian. This partnership has plateaued." On his desk sat a naive, open laptop displaying the announcement of Thorne Innovation's new educational platform developed in partnership with the Freeman Foundation. Olivia's name was prominently featured as the program director. The initiative had already secured major funding and was being implemented in underserved schools across the country. Julian closed the laptop, a strange mix of emotions washing over him. Envy, certainly, but also something unexpected. Respect. His phone buzzed with a text from an unfamiliar number. "Coffee tomorrow? We should talk." Marcus. The following afternoon, Julian found himself in a modest cafe far from his usual polished haunts. Marcus was waiting, accompanied by a woman Julian didn't recognize. "This is Priya Sharma," Marcus introduced them. "She's been developing that accessibility software I mentioned months ago, the one you said wasn't marketable enough." Julian vaguely remembered dismissing the idea as lacking flash. Now, as Priya passionately outlined her vision for technology that could genuinely improve lives, Julian felt a strange sensation, like waking from a long, self-induced trance. "Why are you showing me this now?" Julian asked when she finished. Marcus leaned forward. "Because you're at a crossroads, and I've known you long enough to believe you might finally be ready to choose a different path. Our company still has potential, real potential, not just to make money, but to matter." 2 months later, Julian stood in the much-changed offices of what was now Pierce Sharma Technologies. Gone were the pretentious art pieces and intimidating glass partitions. The space felt collaborative, purposeful. Their pivot to accessibility solutions had retained only half their original investors, but attracted new ones who shared their refocused mission. "Julian," his assistant called, "Eleanor Freeman is here for your meeting." Eleanor entered his office with her characteristic warmth. At 70, she moved with the energy of someone decades younger, driven by purpose rather than ambition. "Your proposal is impressive," she said, taking a seat. "Integrating accessibility features into educational platforms could make a significant difference." Julian nodded, still finding his footing in this new territory of authentic work. "We're hoping the foundation might consider a partnership. That would ultimately be Olivia's decision," Eleanor replied. "Her department oversees these integrations." The mention of Olivia no longer triggered the sharp pain it once had. "I understand. I would welcome her professional assessment." Eleanor studied him thoughtfully. "You've changed." "I'm trying," Julian admitted. "Some lessons come at a higher cost than others." Later that week, Julian received an email from Olivia suggesting a meeting to discuss possible collaboration. The professional courtesy of her message carried no hint of their personal history, no triumph, no lingering resentment. When they finally met in a conference room at Thorne Innovations, Dominic was present as well. The initial awkwardness quickly gave way to productive discussion. Julian noticed the simple engagement ring on Olivia's finger, but offered sincere congratulations without the bitterness he might have expected from himself. "Your approach to voice recognition for literacy support is impressive," Olivia noted as they concluded. "We'd like to run a pilot program integrating it with our platform." As they shook hands, Julian realized something profound. This wasn't Olivia's revenge story. It never had been. She hadn't dedicated her life to proving him wrong or making him regret his choices. She had simply moved forward, building something meaningful with someone who recognized her worth from the beginning. Walking back to his office through the autumn afternoon, Julian reflected on the strange journey of the past year. He had lost the trappings of success he once prized so highly, but was finding something he hadn't known he needed: purpose, authenticity, and the humbling opportunity to begin again. That evening, as he worked late reviewing Priya's latest prototype, Julian received a text from Marcus. "Dinner? Bringing someone you should meet. Friend from my volunteer work. No agenda, no networking, just good people and real conversation." Julian hesitated only briefly before replying, "I'd like that." He was learning, slowly but surely, that the most valuable connections weren't transactions but recognitions, of shared values, of authentic purpose, of the simple humanity that status could neither enhance nor diminish. Outside his window, the city continued its endless rhythm, indifferent to the small transformations happening within its countless lit windows. Julian's story wouldn't make headlines or trend on social media. There would be no public vindication or dramatic showdown, just the quiet revolution of one man learning at long last to measure success not by what others saw, but by what he could finally see himself.